we're going to be exploring some cultural ideas about the soul, but also sharing some stories from science and nature. And I think what you're going to find, and I think it's certainly something Gemma and I found while we were writing this show, is that these two different worlds aren't quite as incompatible as they might initially seem. Let's begin with the building around us, the Methodists. What do the Methodists have to say about the soul? Well, Methodism is a branch of Christianity that's particularly focused on community and charity. And Christians believe that the soul will live forever in the afterlife after you die. And that's a particularly comforting thought for anybody, I think, the idea that a part of you is going to live on after you die. And it's particularly comforting to think that it's a part of you that contains everything that makes you you, that contains your unique human essence. But what if it's not true? What if everything that makes you you is just flesh and blood and bone? René Descartes said, "I think, therefore I am." So perhaps the closest we've actually got in the human body to a unique human essence is our thinking organ, the brain. Maybe your soul is nothing more than around 1.5 kilograms of protein and fat. I always start to think about stuff like this whenever I consider the first story that I'm going to share with you this evening. And this is a true story. It's about a man called Phineas Gage. His story begins in 1848. Phineas Gage is 25 years old. And he was said to have been considered a capable and efficient man, and a smart, shrewd businessman. He was so trusted that Phineas Gage had been made foreman, head of a construction crew working on laying down railway tracks in Vermont in the United States. Phineas Gage was a young man with a lot going for him, until the day it all literally blew up in his face. On this fateful day, Gage and his team were clearing an area of rocks, ready to lay down these tracks. And the way they clear the rocks was by boring a hole in the ground, filling it with blasting powder and a fuse, and then packing sand and clay down on top of it before blowing the whole thing up, clearing out all the rocks. Now, the way they used to pack that sand and clay into the hole was by using an instrument called a tamping iron. And this was a long iron rod, about over 1 metre long with a tapered end. And they literally just tamped down that sand and clay into the hole. And Phineas Gage must have loved doing this, because he had his own custom-made tamping iron. So there he was, with his custom-made tamping iron, tamping away on this particular day, and it just so happened that something behind him distracted him, just for a split second, and he turned around just to see what was going on. And that split second was all that it took for his tamping iron to clink against a rock, cause a spark, which set off the explosives, which set off the whole thing right in front of Phineas Gage. That tamping iron was sent rocketing through his left cheek, behind his left eye, through the front of the left side of his brain, and out the top of his skull. And it landed like a javelin, 25 metres away, standing upright in the ground. Amazingly, Gage survived. Believe it or not. He didn't just survive, he had a hole in his head, he was covered in blood, but he was talking, he was chatting to his friends, he was lucid. So his friends packed him on the back of an ox cart, and they took him back to his lodgings, and of course, they sent for a doctor. Now, there's a lot of gruesome details about this story. We could probably spend an hour going over all these gruesome details, but I think I'm just going to share one gruesome detail with you, so just prepare yourself. So, Gage is sitting there in his lodgings, and he's chatting to his doctor, and he's covered in blood, holding his head, and as he's chatting, Gage stands up, and he vomits. And as he vomits, the pressure of that action presses what's been described as half a teacup full of brain out of the hole in his head, and it flops onto the floor. In fact, I did warn you. There's worse stuff than that, but I'm not going to tell you. So he's not as unlucky as he sounds, though, Gage, because it just so happened that he was acquainted with one of the few doctors in the world at that time that was able to treat this kind of injury. This guy was called Dr. John Martin Harlow, and he was the one attending Phineas Gage, and he bandaged the wound, he cleaned the wound, he kept it clean, and he cared for Gage, and Gage very slowly recovered. And weeks later, Gage was well enough that he could go back to his parents' farm, when he even began to do some odd jobs, which sounds pretty good. But Gage hadn't walked away from this accident completely unscathed. Not only had he lost the sight in his left eye, but he'd also lost a lot of the front of the left side of his brain. And what Dr. Harlow and Gage's friends and family found was that Gage was no longer the same man. Before he had been capable and efficient and smart and shrewd, and now he was easily distracted. He was often disrespectful to people, and he had even become extremely foul-mouthed as well. Now, his friends were quoted to have said that he was no longer Gage. He even lost his job on the railway. So he had to earn a living. So for a while, Gage became a sort of human exhibit. People would come from miles around to gawk at the man that had survived such a horrific accident. But interest began to wane after a while. And so in 1852, Gage moved to South America to become a long-distance stagecoach driver in Chile. And this is where his fortunes began to change for the better for a while. He must have been pretty good at this job, because Gage held this job down for 7 years. But it wasn't to last. In 1859, his health began to deteriorate. And so he moved to San Francisco to be cared for by his mother and his sister. And there he began to have epileptic seizures, most likely linked to this injury he had suffered. And these seizures grew worse and they grew more frequent, until eventually, in 1860, 12 years after his accident, Phineas Gage passed away. This was the first documented case where a brain injury could be confidently linked to a personality change. These days, scientists know that the forefront of the frontal lobes play a significant role in impulse control and planning. And there's even been some speculation amongst modern scientists that maybe when Gage moved to South America and became a long-distance stagecoach driver, he might have accidentally given himself a form of accidental therapy. Because to be a long-distance stagecoach driver, you've got to look after your horses. You've got to regularly engage with your passengers. You've got to stick to a routine. So in this manner, it's possible that Gage taught himself some of the skills he had lost in the accident. It's possible that he became more like the capable and efficient man of old. This is pretty plausible speculation, given what we know these days about how people with brain injuries can often relearn skills that they've lost. But consider the implications of this story. If a brain injury can have such a significant impact on a person's personality, what does that say about the identity? What does it say about the brain? And what does it say about the human soul? Are we just biological machines? Are characters determined by nothing more than chemical impulses or electrical signals? Are the values and ideals that we hold dear just something that can be switched off or reset as easily as we might restore a phone to factory settings? It's a sobering thought. But it's not the only possible interpretation of this story. In 1866, and I must stress this was done with the permission of the family of Phineas Gage, Dr. Harlow dug up the skull of Phineas Gage. And he took that skull along with that tamping iron which Gage kept all his life, and Dr. Harlow put them both on display at the Harvard Medical School, where they both remain to this day. In fact, we've got a 3D printout of the actual skull of Phineas Gage right here. There he is. So you can see exactly where that tamping iron shot out. Dr. Harlow did a lot more than just dig up Phineas Gage's skull. Much of what we know these days about the story of Phineas Gage comes from Dr. Harlow's notes. So in a way, he kept Gage's story alive. Now there's a famous saying, and it says that a person dies twice. Once when they take their last breath, and then for a second time when their name is spoken for the last time. I don't know who said that. Me and Gemma looked for ages, and it's been attributed to everyone from the ancient Egyptians to Banksy. So, I don't know who said that. But I think there's some truth in it, especially pertaining to this story. Because Dr. Harlow, he kept this story alive. And maybe at the same time, he ensured that the soul of Phineas Gage would also endure.
We've heard there about the role of the brain, but has that been the same throughout time? Ankh-Esenarset was a musician in the city of Thebes in Egypt. Working in the great temple of Karnak, she performed songs as part of daily rituals to Amun-Ra, king of the gods. She might sing or use instruments like rattles, drums, or harps to entertain Amun-Ra and keep him in a good mood. Ankh-Esenarset died around 3,000 years ago. When she died, she was mummified and placed in a coffin. Part of the mummification process was that her brain was removed by a hook through her nose. Her remaining organs were removed, bound in linen, and then returned to their places in her body. Why this difference? Why was her heart wrapped and returned, while her brain was discarded? To understand this, we need to explore the ancient Egyptian beliefs around the soul. To the ancient Egyptians, the soul came in three parts: the ka, the ba, and the ak, and each one behaved differently. The ka could be seen as the life force of an individual, that essence which makes them part of the living world. When a person died, they were fundamentally separated from their ka, but the ka continued to live inside their body. Ancient Egyptians saw the body as the home of the ka after the person had died, and they tried to make the afterlife as pleasant as possible for that ka. Coffins were often decorated to look like the dead person, so that the ka would recognise its home. And ka was fed by offerings and left with important or valuable objects from the person's life, like jewellery. The ba also benefited from these offerings, but it had a bit more freedom. Usually depicted as a bird with the face of the dead person, the ba was able to fly between the worlds of the living and the dead. Some tombs even included a small perch on which the ba could sit and watch over the local area, presumably taking back any particularly juicy gossip to the ka to discuss. The third and final part of the soul was the ak, the blessed spirit. It was said to mingle with the gods and could even influence events in the living world. But not everyone was deemed worthy of having that. You had to pass a series of tests. On your journey through the afterlife, you might encounter any number of dangerous creatures, from crocodiles to demons to even the gods themselves. Some of these might physically attack you, while others might demand a password before letting you move on. How was a person to complete these tasks? Well, if you were lucky, then your family may have left a copy of the Book of the Dead in your tomb. The Book of the Dead was a practical book of spells and guidance to help someone on their journey through the afterlife. By consulting your copy of the book, you might hope to find the perfect spell to defeat the giant snake in front of you, or perhaps the password to get through the next gate. If a person completed all of these tasks, there was one final test. Your heart would be weighed against Mat, the feather of truth. On a giant set of golden scales, the gods would place a single white feather. This feather was actually a goddess herself and represented truth, justice, and balance. On the other side of the scales, the gods would place your heart. Ancient Egyptians viewed the heart as the seat of intelligence, of emotions, and of moral judgment. Live a good life with balance and gratitude in mind, and your heart would remain light as a feather. But live a life of crime, or greed, or focus too much on the wrong things in life, and your heart would be weighed down. Only those whose heart balanced the feather would be deemed worthy of having an apple. Those who were deemed unworthy were set for the ultimate punishment. Sitting next to the scales at all times was the creature Ammon. Ammon had the face of a crocodile, the body of a wildcat, and the hindquarters of a hippo. Yeah, conventional creature. If you were deemed unworthy of having an apple, then Ammon ate your heart, earning her the title Ammon the Devourer. Very easy going. This was the ultimate punishment. Without a heart, you no longer existed in any realm, living or dead. There would be no afterlife for you. Perhaps this is why such care was taken over Anchis Narset's heart. The function of her brain wasn't understood, so it wasn't deemed useful to her in her journey through the afterlife. But a lot of the rest of her organs were of clear use. Her heart in particular was where her soul came from, where it would live after she died, and was ultimately what she would be judged on.
So who exactly gets a soul, anyway? If souls exist, do animals have them? Now, if you're a pet owner, chances are you just said yes straight away. But I think it's still a question that's worth exploring because it challenges us to consider the nature of a soul and what we would consider evidence that a soul is present. Perhaps all living beings have a soul. Animals, insects, plants. Maybe a soul is something you earn throughout your life by performing good deeds. Well, if this is the case, what qualifies as a good deed for a dog? Or a kangaroo? Or a fungus? Maybe there's other evidence that a soul is present. Maybe it's the capacity for love, or the desire for knowledge, or the ability to communicate. Maybe it's self-awareness, the ability to recognize yourself as an individual. Can we truly say any of these things, as we understand them in humans, are present in animals? Whenever you start Googling questions like this, and which I did a lot, and what I found, and what you'll probably find if you to do it, is that eventually one animal in particular gets brought up online as an example of an animal with a soul. And you may well have heard of this animal, because she was a celebrity during her lifetime. I'm talking about Coco the gorilla. And during her life, Coco was known as the gorilla that could talk to humans. Coco was born in 1971 in San Francisco Zoo. And at the age of 1, she was loaned to a graduate student called Francine Penny Patterson. This loan was only meant to last 4 years, long enough for Patterson to complete her dissertation. But the relationship ended up lasting a lot longer than that. In 1976, Patterson founded the Gorilla Foundation to house Coco and other gorillas. Patterson claimed that she had taught Coco to communicate using American Sign Language. Coco was said to have had a working vocabulary of up to 1,000 signs, and she could apparently use these signs in some pretty complex ways. For example, apparently Coco could sign about objects that were no longer present. Coco could reminisce about events that happened in the past to both her and Patterson. Coco was able to communicate about communicating, apparently. Other gorillas, other signing gorillas, Coco could sign to them that they had made a good sign. Coco could even sign deceptively, as a joke, apparently. There was other stuff too. Coco could recognize herself in a mirror, and this was apparent in a really famous photograph of Coco. And this photograph was of Coco looking in a mirror, holding a camera, appearing to take a picture of herself. This photograph was used on the cover of National Geographic magazine in 1978, and it brought Coco to the attention of the world. Coco kept pets throughout her life. She was particularly fond of kittens. Yeah. She had the first cat that Coco owned. She named All Ball, and this was taken as evidence that Coco could run. Again, I might have to disappoint you somewhat because this goes a bit sad now. All Ball escaped from her cage, I'm sorry to say, and was hit by a car and killed. And when Patterson signed this to Coco, Coco apparently reacted by signing sad, bad, frown, cry, and trouble. She was even said to have made a sound akin to human weeping. But Coco was a celebrity, and as a celebrity, she had celebrity friends. During her life, Coco met with Becky White, Sting, Flea out of the Red Hot Chili Peppers, all greats, William Shatner, and Robin Williams, quite famously, and more, much more as well. In 2014, Coco was informed of the death of Robin Williams, and apparently Coco reacted by growing quiet, thoughtful, and somber. But perhaps Coco's most lasting and enduring relationship was with Patterson herself. Patterson cared for, worked for, and looked after Coco every day of Coco's life. Coco viewed Patterson as a mother, and they were together right up until Coco died in 2018. So we've got an ape here that could apparently communicate with humans in a human language, but also was capable of loving humans, of grieving for humans, and for even joking with humans. It's small wonder that Coco's brought up online so much as evidence that animals have a soul. I must admit, when I heard this story myself for the first time, the idea of humans and animals sharing the same immortal essence suddenly seemed a lot easier to swallow. But as with many great stories, there's more than meets the eye to the legend of Coco. You see, there's a lot of people who are quite sceptical about Coco's level of understanding. During her life, she was reported on a lot in the popular press, but there wasn't that much in the way of scientific publications. Patterson never released that much data for other scientists to scrutinize, and as a result of this, it's really difficult to tell how much Coco truly understood what she was communicating. She may have known which signs got her attention and which signs got her fed, But everything else could have been open to the interpretation of Patterson and the other handlers. For example, how do we truly know that she was sombre upon hearing the news of Robin Williams' death? Maybe she was just picking up on the sombre mood of the humans around her. And that name, All, can we truly use it as evidence that Coco could rhyme? Because the words all and ball certainly rhyme in English, but they don't rhyme in American Sign Language. There are a lot of questions about Coco's life for which there are just not many scientific answers. Scientists have been trying to get apes to communicate with humans since the 1930s. Still not quite sure why, but they love it. They've been doing it for ages, but it's never really come to anything. But as anyone with a pet will tell you, just because an animal doesn't communicate their feelings the way a human would, it doesn't mean that they can't communicate. And it certainly doesn't mean that they don't have feelings. So maybe the story of Coco doesn't actually tell us that much about whether animals have a soul or not after all. But I think it does tell us one thing, and that's that humans like to find the soul in other creatures as well as in themselves.
How far does this idea go? If animals might have a soul, do plants? Does the sun? Do mountains? If you were to ask a follower of Shinto practice, the answer is likely to be yes to all of those questions. Shinto is the traditional belief system of Japan, although it's got links to many other religions, particularly Buddhism. Shinto focuses on the worship of kami. Kami means power or spirit, and has been connected with Western ideas of the soul. But in Shinto, there is no separation of the spiritual and the physical world. They are one and the same. The body and the spirit are the same. The idea for, and often the word for, a physical thing is the same as for its kami. Ah, yes. This ties in with a strong reverence for nature within Shinto practice. Now, Shinto has grown up from local rituals all over prehistoric Japan, and as a result of that, there is an amazing variety of stories told and of kami thought to exist. For some people, this reverence for the physical world extends to man-made objects. So amazingly, you get lots and lots of stories of objects that have been so well taken care of and over such a long time that they develop kami, or souls, of their own. I'd like to introduce you to a few of my favourites. Biwa boku boku. A biwa is an instrument. It's like a type of lute, kind of like a teardrop-shaped guitar. Legends tell of biwa that have been played by masters of their craft for years and years, but then left abandoned in a cupboard. Apparently the biwa grow so sad at this neglect that they grow small human bodies with the biwa as the face. Biwa boku boku is said to dress like a blind priest with a special kimono and to live in the temple. Biwa boku boku sits in the corner of the room playing sad, sweet music to himself, remembering every song that those masterful musicians of old ever played. It's said that the music of Biwa boku boku is so sad and so beautiful that it could even charm a demon. Don't feel too sorry for him though, because Biwa boku boku will get petty revenge by throwing raging parties in the temple with some of the other objects that may have developed kami. One of those objects might be the hahakigami, which is a special kind of broom. Brooms are used in Shinto and Buddhist rituals to sweep away negative spirits and cleanse the area. But if you take care of your broom, such that it is still useful after, say, 100 years, it might grow a kami. There's nothing to worry about from the hahakigami though. All these guys are likely to do is frolic in the wind, sweeping up leaves just for the sheer joy of it. They can also act as something of a lucky charm, helping to sweep out unwanted guests that have overstayed their welcome. They're not the only option you've got, though, if you're trying to get rid of people. Perhaps you've got a Karakasa living in your house. Karakasa used to be an umbrella, a Japanese-style paper umbrella. If you do have an old umbrella in your house, do be careful to not rip it, because that rip could become the mouth of your new Karakasa friend. The handle of the umbrella could become a leg that it hops around on, and it might grow one single eye as well as a soul. Now, I've said that these guys are good for getting rid of people. I'll tell you why. All that Karakasa wants to do with his newfound life is sneak up behind people and give them a big wet lick on the back of the head. I would probably be often being licked by a sentient animal. Not all of these creatures are quite so whimsically inclined, though. Fuguruma Yohi is a goblin-like woman who grows when a book cart or a bookshelf grows a canopy. So this can happen when the emotions within the books collect, and it's especially powerful when humans add to those emotions through secret love letters between pages or hidden compartments. It's the human emotions that give birth to Fuguruma Yohi and which keep her fed. All of these objects, in fact, show us what can happen when humans treat objects with respect. In many ways, if we imagine these objects having personalities or souls, then in Shinto at least, they grow them. Now this could tie into our social nature as humans. We seem to want everything to have a personality, right? How many people can think of an object in their house that they've got a bit of an emotional connection with? Perhaps it is well on its way to growing a candle. But what happens when we take this too far? Should humans be creating souls? Or can we? Well, this was touched on in Mary Shelley's genre-defining novel, Frankenstein. In the novel, a young scientist called Victor Frankenstein sets out to discover the secrets of life and death. He creates a creature out of stolen body parts and brings it to life through a secret combination of science and alchemy. While both Frankenstein and his creature start the novel with arguably good intentions, or at least idealistic intentions, they are both driven mad over the course of the story. Desperate to escape his loneliness, the creature begs for a companion creature, or for a relationship with his creator. Being repeatedly denied both, his thoughts turn darker and darker, until he turns to vengeful murder. Frankenstein himself doesn't fare much better. Haunted by his actions and the consequences of his own ambition, his refusal to accept what he has done arguably makes Frankenstein the greater villain of the story. The science of Frankenstein reflects the scientific climate of the early 19th century in which it was written. Scientists were just starting to discover exciting things about electricity and explore what that could be used for. In the 1780s, a scientist called Luigi Galvani discovered that by passing electricity through a dead frog, as one normally does on a frog, its legs could be made to twitch or even kick. He published a paper based on this work in which he declared that animal muscles contain within them their own electricity, a type of electricity that he creatively termed animal electricity. It wasn't long before electricity came to be viewed as the spark of life, prompting lots of research into its use in medicine. At the same time, the use of electricity in public entertainment began to grow in popularity, sometimes through pretty gruesome experiment shows. Galvani's own nephew notoriously repeated that dead frog experiment, but on the body of an executed criminal, causing his eyes to fly open in front of the public audience. Perhaps unsurprisingly, this caused a bit of a stir in the media, with suggestions that electricity could be used to bring people back from the dead. Now that was all going on in 1803, just 13 years before Mary Shelley began work on Frankenstein. With regular references to lightning throughout the novel, as well as Frankenstein's own description that he had infused a spark of being into the lifeless thing. It's perhaps easy to see which area of science had captured Shelley's attention. The novel can be viewed as Mary Shelley's warning to scientists who value ambition over ethics. Humanity should not be playing God and trying to create life. Interestingly, the creature's soul is only directly referenced right at the end of the story, and only by the creature himself. Speaking of the possibility of his death, the creature says, "My spirit will sleep in peace," showing us that the creature at least believes that he has a soul. Perhaps then, Mary Shelley thinks it's possible that humans can create souls, but that there would be awful repercussions if we were to do so. That sentiment is perhaps reflected in the ongoing conversations around artificial intelligence. Humanity has created something new, something capable of learning, of problem solving, and of producing, at least on some level, works of art. So does AI have a soul? Or will it? Well, one way that we can begin to answer that question is through the Turing test. The Turing test was devised by mathematician Alan Turing in the 1950s as a way of answering the question, can machines think? In the test, a person must blindly identify the machine by simply asking questions of it and of another human being. If the person incorrectly identifies the machine as the other human, then that machine has passed the Turing test. Alan Turing reckoned that by around the year 2000, we would have computers capable of reliably passing the Turing test. This hasn't happened. It remains really difficult for computers to pass the Turing test, often because of questions like, are you a machine? Computers don't have reason to lie. They don't know they're being tested. And it's in fact this problem that computers can only do what they're programmed to do that has been put forward as one of the weaknesses of the test. But the more fundamental weakness, and one recognised by Turing himself, is that this isn't a test of if computers have a soul. It's not even really a test of can machines think. Thinking itself is so hard to define. So much so that even Alan Turing considered the question, can machines think, to be too meaningless to investigate. What the Turing test does judge is how good a computer is at playing the imitation game, pretending to be a human being. A computer that's good at playing the imitation game might be able to hold a convincing conversation, but there are some things that Turing considered they would never be able to do. Be kind, take initiative, have a sense of humour, make mistakes, enjoy strawberries and cream, and do something truly new. That's only a selection of a longer list, but to me at least, those things do feel like the domain of humanity rather than artificial intelligence. However, the recent explosion in AI-produced art might call that last one into question. If computers can now produce art, surely that counts as doing something truly new. Well, most AI works by taking in information and images and spotting patterns. So the more access it has to information and images, the more powerful it gets. Some AI has access to countless works of art and uses that to make its own. So does that still count as doing something truly new? And how different is that from what humans do anyway?
Gemma talked a little bit about humans playing God there, but what about your actual gods? Well, according to ancient Greek mythology, the goddess of the soul was named Psyche. But she wasn't always a goddess. She began her life as mortal. But she wasn't just any ordinary mortal. Psyche was the most beautiful woman in the entire world. People would come from miles around to gaze in awe at her uncanny good looks. Now this wasn't as fun as it sounds, because people could never see past the beauty. They constantly put it on a pedestal. It was a lonely existence. Aphrodite, the goddess of love, was furious that a human, a mortal woman, should be worshipped for her beauty, and so she decided to punish Psyche. She sent her son, Eros, also known as Cupid, to prick Psyche with one of his arrows of love. The idea being that Eros would cause Psyche to fall in love with the most wretched, ugly human being he could find. Instead, Eros accidentally pricked himself. He fell head over heels in love with Psyche, and she loved him in return. Through a series of unfortunate events, Eros and Psyche were separated, and Psyche found herself in the clutches of Aphrodite. Aphrodite was really mad now, and so she decided to punish Psyche by setting an impossible task. She locked Psyche in a room, and inside this room was an enormous pile of wheat, grain, barley, poppy seeds, and beans. And all Psyche had to do was to separate each individual piece of wheat, grain, barley, poppy seeds, and beans into neat little separate piles, all in one night. Have you ever had a job that was so overwhelming, so seemingly impossible that you just haven't even known where to begin? Well, this is where Psyche was now, times a million. She just sat there in the middle of the cell and wept. An ant, crawling across the floor of the cell, witnessed her plight and felt sorry for her. And so the ant decided to help. The ant encouraged the rest of its colony to pitch in. All the ants set to work on the huge pile, and by the morning there was a pile of wheat, a pile of grain, a pile of barley, a pile of poppy seeds, and a separate pile of beans. Aphrodite was not happy. And so she sent Psyche another impossible task. This time Psyche had to take a crystal cup and fill it with water from the river Styx. This is easier said than done, because the river Styx is the river you must cross in order to pass into the land of the dead. And it is not easy for a living human being to reach the river Styx. In fact, the river Styx is found, apparently, at the top of an impossibly tall, impossibly steep, impossibly treacherous cliff. Once again, Psyche was overwhelmed. She stood there at the bottom of the cliff, just asking herself, how can I possibly do this? This time her plight was witnessed by Zeus, king of the gods. He sent down his own personal eagle, which swooped down, grabbed the crystal cup from the hands of Psyche, flew all the way up to the top of the cliff, filled the crystal cup with the black waters of the river Styx, flew all the way back down, and returned the crystal cup to the grateful grasp of Psyche. Aphrodite was not happy. She decided to set a third and final task for Psyche. Now this task may have been the most impossible one of all. This task involved actually going into the land of the dead. This time Psyche had to go before Queen Persephone, queen of the underworld, and ask Persephone for a portion of her beauty. She was to return that portion of beauty in a golden box back to Aphrodite. Now you can see why this might be a problem, because we've already established that the land of the dead is really hard to get into for a living person. But also, Queen Persephone is not going to give a portion of her beauty to just any old passerby. And also, what does a portion of beauty even look like anyway? So this was a problem that Psyche had. She climbed to the tallest tower, the top of the tallest tower she could find. She looked out across the land and she thought, where do I start? What can I do? I just don't know what to do. This time her plight was witnessed, not by an ant, not by God, but by the tower itself. The tower whispered to Psyche, offering her directions to a shortcut into the land of the dead. Well, Psyche followed these directions and soon found herself standing before Queen Persephone, asking for a portion of her beauty. To Psyche's great surprise, Persephone granted this request, albeit with a sly smile on her face. So Psyche's travelling back, holding this golden box, on her way back to Aphrodite, and all the while she's thinking, what's in this box? What could possibly be in this box? What does a portion of beauty look like? What is it? So she carries this box and it's nibbling at the back of her brain. She can't ignore it. Eventually she can't ignore it any longer. She opens the box, just a little crack. A cloud of black smoke puffs into her face, sending her into a deep and permanent slumber. The beauty sleep of the gods was never meant for mortals. Meanwhile, Eros had been flying overhead, searching for his lost love. Did I mention he's got wings? He's not in an aeroplane. He's flying overhead with his wings, and he's looking for his lost love. And he spots her lying on the side of the road in this deep slumber. He swoops down. He wakes her up with another prick from his arrow of love. He carries her back to Aphrodite, and together they hand Aphrodite the golden box, completing the final task. Then Eros flies Psyche all the way to the top of Mount Olympus, where the gods dwell. And there the two lovers petition Zeus for permission to marry. Zeus grants their request. He summons all of the gods back to the top of Mount Olympus for the wedding, and he forbids Aphrodite from ever harming Psyche ever again. During the ceremony, Psyche is handed a goblet full of ambrosia. Now, I don't mean the custard, I mean the drink of the gods. She takes a sip from the goblet and grows butterfly wings on her back and becomes the goddess of the soul. Eros and Psyche live happily ever after. This story has been interpreted in a number of ways over the years. Some people see it as a story about the heart and the soul must always be intertwined. Others see it as a story of how the soul must be earned through hardship and strife. I personally like to see it as a story of, yes, the soul must endure hardship, but this hardship can be overcome by letting other souls into your life. Psyche could never have completed those tasks without the help of others. From the lowliest ant to the king of the gods, each had a part to play in Psyche's triumph over adversity.
This spirit of collaboration is very important to science. I'd like to tell you the story of one of the great collaborative scientific endeavours. In 1949, Europe found itself rebuilding after the World Wars. In order to remain attractive to scientists, Europe would need to invest in scientific equipment and scientific organisations. From the outset, it was clear that the scientific endeavour must be dissociated from political and military fighting. In 1953, the European Council for Nuclear Research, or CERN for short, was born. A collaborative endeavour between the countries of Europe to lead science in an expressly peaceful way. CERN is a place where people can carry out scientific research using highly specialised equipment, most famously the Large Hadron Collider. Written into the convention of CERN are the requirements that any work carried out with them must be separated from the military and published freely available to all. There are now thousands of scientists from over 100 countries involved with work at CERN, and some amazing discoveries and inventions have come out of the work there. There's one really obscure one that you might have actually heard of called the internet. Really exciting. The main focus of CERN, though, does remain particle physics. Now, the link between particle physics and the soul might not be immediately clear, The ideas can seem like chalk and cheese. But dive with me into the mysterious world of dark matter, and let's find out if they really are so different. The main way that we learn things about the universe is through light. Light is the messenger by which we receive almost all information about what is out there. But what about the stuff that doesn't shine, like dark matter? Well, how do we learn about it? How do we even know it's there? Well, much like what some people say about the soul, we have to look at its effect on the stuff that we can see. And also, in this case, use some maths, which I love. Here's what we know. Galaxies spin, and we know how fast they should be spinning based on our laws of motion and gravity. Spin too slowly, and your galaxy collapses in on itself. Too quickly, and all your stars get flung out into space. We know the precise speeds because it's based on the amount of stuff that's in your galaxy. So galaxies with more matter in need to spin faster to keep all that matter in the right place. But here's the small problem. All our galaxies are spinning wrong. We don't really know why yet, but we'll get there. They are going way too fast for the amount of stuff that we can see, and they're not flying apart. So there's got to be some stuff in those galaxies that we can't see. That stuff is dark matter. But what's sun got to do with all of that? I hear you cry. Well, we've got a couple of candidates for particles that we think might make up dark matter, including those particles in all the maths, the aforementioned maths, would make the numbers make sense. So at CERN, they are looking for those particles. By smashing particles together and seeing what crazy fun new particles fall out of that, we might discover the particles that make up dark matter. But we're not there yet. The point of this story is not to suggest that dark matter may end up being the scientific explanation of the soul, but rather to emphasize that science is comfortable dealing with unknowns. In fact, it frequently requires it. Science isn't finished, and it takes great imagination to be able to entertain the ideas that may one day become facts. We don't know everything, and that is one of the greatest joys of science.
We're almost at the end of the stories this evening, but before we finish, I just want to talk a little bit about the Hindu concept of Brahman and Atman. Now the Hindu concept of Atman is quite similar to the idea of a soul. It's a living being's essence, the real person inside the physical body. And when the physical body dies, Atman will carry on, taking on body after body after body. Brahman is the single binding unity behind all the diversity in the universe. There is a part of Brahman in everything and everyone, like sparks from a flame. And this part, these sparks, that's what we call Atman. I'd like to talk a little bit more about this concept through a story now, and this story comes from a Hindu religious text called the Upanishads. And it's the story of a man called Udalaka and his son Shvetaketu. And it begins when Shvetaketu is 12 years old, and Udalaka sends him away to find teachers. And this is what Shvetaketu does. He goes away, he finds teachers, and he spends 12 years studying the sciences and the scriptures and the arts. And after 12 years, he comes back age 24 to his father's house. And like a lot of people who go away to university, he thinks he knows everything. He comes back and he says, "Father, I learned so much about the sciences and the scriptures and the arts. I think it's fair to say I pretty much know everything, Father." And Udalaka says, "That's interesting. Okay, my son. I wonder though, did your teachers tell you about that secret spiritual wisdom God allows you to know the unknown, and hear the unheard, and think the unthought. No, Father, they must have missed that, said Shvetakatu. Please tell me more. Well, my son, said Udalaka, head to the corner of the room there, fetch me that pot, bring it over here. And so Shvetakatu does as he's told. He goes over, he gets the pot, he brings it back to his father. And Udalaka says, this pot was once a lump of clay. But that lump of clay could have been made into many things. It could have been made into planes. It could have been made into toys, musical instruments, sculptures. The name and the form may differ, but it is all made from the same thing. It's all made from clay. So by knowing a lump of clay, a person can know all things made from clay. And this is like you, Shvetakatu. In the beginning, there was the one being who brought forth the cosmos and entered into everything. Everything, Shvetakatu, entered into the birds and the animals and the trees and the flowers, everything. And it entered into everyone. It entered into you and me and your teachers, everyone. The name and the form may differ, but it's all the same essence. And by knowing this essence, a person can know all things. I'm not quite sure I understand, Father, said Shvetakatu. Why can't we see this essence? Well, my son, said Udalaka, head out into the garden for me. Pick a fig from the tree outside. Bring it back. So Shvetakatu does as he's told. He goes into the garden, he picks a fig, and he brings it back to his father. And Udalaka says, split that fig in half for me, my son. Excellent. What do you see inside? Seeds, father. Very good. Now, my son, take one of those seeds, split that seed in half. What do you see inside? Nothing, father. Nothing, you say, my son. Well, if there is nothing inside the seed, how may it grow one day into a mighty tree? It is that hidden essence inside the seed. That is how it can grow into a mighty tree. And that hidden essence is in all things. I still don't get it, Father. I'm sorry. If we can't see the essence, how do we know it's there? Very well, my son, said Udalaka. Go over to the other corner of the room and fetch me that jug of water. Bring it back here. So Shvetakatu does as he's told. He goes into the corner of the room, he gets the jug of water, he brings it back to his father. Now, my son, pour the contents of this bag of salt into the water and give it a good old stir. So Shvetakatu does as he's told. He pours the salt into the water, stirs it up. Now, my son, said Udalaka, I want you to take a big swig from the top of the jug. Shvetakatu does as he's told. He knocks back the water, takes a big gulp. How does that taste, my son? Salty, father. Okay. Take another big swig from the middle of the jug. Shvetakatu does as he's told. He knocks back the water. How does that taste, my son? Still salty, father. Very well, my son. Take a third gulp from the jug. Finish it off. Drink it all up. Shvetakatu does as he's told. He knocks back the rest of the water, finishes it off. How does that taste, my son? Salty, father. I drank from the top of the jug and it was salty. I drank from the middle of the jug and it was salty. I drank from the bottom of the jug and that was salty. It's all salty. Exactly, said Udalaka. It is all salty. We can't see that salt, but we know it is in every part of the water. Top, middle, bottom. Just as we can't see this essence, but we know it is in all things. Shvetakatu's eyes began to widen. I think, Father, I'm beginning to understand. Now, I'm rather fond of that story. And to tell you why I'm so fond of it, exactly, I need to tell you one final story. But this final story is the biggie, because this is the story of the universe itself. And it begins 14 billion years ago, give or take. An infinitely small, infinitely hot, infinitely dense point expands, stretching out in all directions, everywhere, all at once. Space, time, matter begin. This is the Big Bang. In this infant universe, only the lightest elements exist. Hydrogen, helium, a little bit of lithium. Clouds of gas clumped together, forming the very first stars in the universe. Millions of years pass. Eventually, the largest of these stars goes supernova, exploding, sending out brand new elements into the universe that are even heavier than hydrogen and helium. Clouds of gas clump together once again, forming the second generation of stars. Millions of years pass, and once again the largest of these stars goes supernova, this time sending out even heavier elements, stuff like carbon, oxygen, the majority of the elements in your body. In fact, any element in your body that is heavier than iron has travelled through at least one supernova. So science may not be able to tell us whether a soul exists. It can't see the soul. It can't measure the soul. But science can tell us one thing, and that is, if souls exist, they belong to beings that are made of stardust. So perhaps there's something in this idea of the soul being an extension of the essence of the universe. There's a famous quote, and it's just absolutely one of my favourite quotes of all time. And it's from a very famous scientist called Carl Sagan. And Carl Sagan said, "The cosmos is within us. We are made of star stuff. We are a way for the universe to know itself." So maybe this is our purpose in life. Maybe we are the eyes and the ears and the hands of the universe, reaching out to experience knowledge and beauty and pain and love. Perhaps in this way, we are the means for the universe itself to have a soul. And that brings us to the end of our stories this evening. Thank you very much.